در زبان فارسی یک مقوله بسیار مشهوری داریم که می‌فرماید دانش و توانایی زمانی ارزش دارد که از آن در خدمت مردم استفاده گردد. Simply, it means knowledge and capabilities are valuable only when it serves other people. And today, more than ever, we do have many people around us that they put and they apply this principle into practice. There are volunteers that they give their time, their energy, and their skill and their experience to the service of other people. Most often, they remain invisible. But before I talk more about these people and the impact of their work over the communities, first let me begin with the story of a child who was born and raised in a crisis context. And when he was only 7 years of old, his family was forced to flee their home and leave their area of origin because of conflict. For a long time, he and many other children like him, they could not go to school. But one day, he returned back to the class, he finished the school, and later he made it to the university. Because he had gone through the hardship and he had experienced the challenges himself, so he didn't want to succeed all alone by his own future, but he also wanted to bring even a small change to the life of his community and to his people. So he chose to become a volunteer. And his very first volunteering role was teaching other children who were also deprived from education and formal school on their small village. Later, those volunteering became his way of life. But in return, those volunteering experiences and actions had opened doors to him and had also helped him to get his very first formal role within the humanitarian sector and helped him to join one of the national humanitarian organizations, which eventually helped him to join the United Nations, where he had the opportunity to spend over a decade of his time and experience serving other people affected by the crisis. Now you may think who that child was. Yes, that child was me. Though the child was me, but the experience and the story is not so unique to me. It is the story of many of us and the children across the country who also experienced the same crisis, displacement, and migration. But luckily, sometimes it ends with the hope. For me, over the years, I have seen many emergencies, conflicts, natural disasters, and the crisis. I have seen how life changes quickly and how people lose everything suddenly. And after those incidents, I have visited communities where homes had collapsed, people were displaced, and fear was everywhere. But what stayed with me was not only the destruction, what stayed with me was also who shows up on the very first critical hours on those situations, who extend a helping hand, and how local people, how communities, how volunteers, they become the survival system and how they become the invisible infrastructure and how they begin to help each other until a formal system arrived to the area. Just think of the recent incidents across the country. The most recent one, when the earthquake strikes the eastern part of Afghanistan, Kunar province mainly, a remote and mountain area where people used to walk for miles just to access basic services. When the earthquake strikes this place, just within few seconds, the whole villages were destroyed, and thousands of people, they were struggling under the rubble between the life and death. But still, they were hoping that someone could arrive and could extend a hand and could help them, could rescue them. What multiplies the crisis here in this situation, it is the lack of basic facilities on the ground. You see, like, there was no nearby health facilities on the ground. The roads were blocked because of landslide. And most of the time, The aid organizations and the formal system, they were going to the villages either from Jalalabad or from Kabul, like hundreds of miles away. But again, the same question arises, that who could show up the very first on those critical moments and to extend the hand to help communities. The answer here and almost everywhere in the crisis context and in the remote areas, it's always the same. It is the local people, it is the volunteers, and it's the neighboring communities that they volunteer themselves and they start filling the gap. They start helping other communities until the formal help could arrive to the area. I visited communities after the earthquake, and after those incidents, I realized that at the very beginning, there was no coordination at first. There was no aid organizations and there was no formal system. It was just people, they were responding to people. And in those moments, I realized something very important. When formal systems take time and until they arrive to the area and to the ground, people already they begin to help each other and they start filling the gaps with whatever they have in hand. Like it was the network of youth volunteers and volunteers from the neighboring communities who were pulling other people from under the rubble. It was them, it was the communities that they were providing on those initial hours. They were providing food, water, and they were making their home shelter. And they were carrying injured to the nearby hospitals. We often think of volunteerism as a generous act, but in a crisis context, it is neither. It is the invisible infrastructure. If we think of another example from the recent returnee influx from the country, where millions of Afghans, they were returning back home, no food, no shelter, and nowhere to live, no transportation. Of course, on those critical moments, there was the help of donors and government support and national international organizations on the ground, on the border. But because of the scale of return was much bigger, so the response was not sufficient, and they could not cover all of the returnees. Again, there was the network of volunteers and the local people that they showed up. They opened their home as a shelter, they provided transportation, and they provided food and basic stuff for days, for weeks, and for months. They were doing all these things not because of recognition, not because of a reward, or not something to receive in return, but they were doing all these things, and their work was driven by just one action: humanity. And these were just examples of local people and volunteer contribution in a crisis context. But here's a big picture. Just recently, the United Nations volunteers, they have released the State of World Volunteerism report, and they indicate that globally over 2.1 billion people volunteer every month, out of which 1.1 billion people volunteer within this region, Asia Pacific. In Afghanistan, at the moment, there is no constitutional scale over the contribution of volunteers within the country. But doesn't mean that there are no volunteers at the moment. Volunteerism has a very historical roots across our culture and our society, which mostly it happens in the shape of informal volunteering. But when we are coming to the formal volunteering, there are volunteers that they are currently engaged within the NGOs, civil society organizations, charity organizations, government-led initiatives, and as well as within the United Nations. We call them United Nations volunteers. Just last year, over 250 national, international, United Nations volunteers, They served in Afghanistan, and they served communities alongside of other UN family and colleagues, providing support to the communities within Afghanistan. For me personally, over the past 4 years, where I have had the privilege of working as the country coordinator for the United Nations volunteers in Afghanistan, I have also had the privilege of working not only with the United Nations volunteers, but also to hear and to listen from other volunteers across the country within the different platforms. Every day I hear from the volunteers, I listen from them, and I witness already how much knowledge, capacity, resilience, and human commitment existed across the communities in Afghanistan, though they are the backbone of the resilience across the communities, and they are the one who bring the real resilience within the local communities. But yet, while we talk about the humanitarian and development response across the country, we, or globally, often the time we invest heavily on physical infrastructures like in buildings, vehicles, or other stuff, which are indeed really important. But we often the time we invest on social infrastructures like communities, people capacity, volunteers capacity, and the coordination among the communities, which are the one who help those physical infrastructure function and keep the communities alive. So if we want to build the real resilience, then the concept of volunteerism cannot be an afterthought. We need to engage volunteers and the local people in the design of programs, projects, and our investment. And here is that we need concrete actions at three levels: at the individual level, at the community level, and at the policy level. At the individual level, we all understand that we have something to offer: our time, our skill, our energy, and sometimes our compassionate. Volunteering is not a heroic action. It is just we need to move a bit beyond our own household and our own communities and to give what we can offer with a small volunteering action. At the community level, we need to understand that communities that are connected, they can recover fast, they may cope with the crisis context strongly, and they can build the real resilience. And most often the times, there are communities that they are the backbone of the crisis response. So those networks of volunteers within the communities need to be focused and need to be invested. And at the policy level, which is the most important and critical one, the governments, the institutions, and the organizations, they must design a system, or they must recognize volunteers just not as a temporary helpers, but as a strategic partners. It means investing in their safety, in their well-being, and in volunteers' capacity. It means building a system that volunteers are seen not just at the margin, but also at the center of community solutions. The idea that just I presented, it is not only about volunteering, it's also about how we want to build the real resilience among our communities, and also how we return back the power to the local people and to the volunteers within the communities that often the time they are the backbone of the crisis response, and how we empower them as the real champions. And that brings me to the end of my speech and to the question that I want to leave with you today. Today, more than ever, that the uncertainty is very high and the formal systems are slow, and people, they need our time, our energy, and our skill. So how would you show up to your community? Thank you very much. Tashakkur.